Hey everyone, Jim here, and in this video, I'm going to show you to get started with a Nessus Vulnerability Scanner. The Nessus Vulnerability Scanner is a common scanning tool used in the cybersecurity field. It's used oftentimes for penetration testing, ethical hacking, or even just general network monitoring and security maintenance. There's a lot of great purposes for it. Nessus is very similar to Nmap, but it has a lot of advanced features built into it. Because of that, and I guess one of the reasons for that, is because it's a commercial product. So there are a number of versions. The version we're going to be focusing on today is the community version, which is completely free to use. So I'm going to be doing this in my Kali Linux virtual machine. It's what I really would recommend most students that are interested in learning more about cybersecurity use. There's a lot of really good tools and features built into this. Now I'm just going to launch Firefox. It's pinned right up here on the taskbar. And I'm going to go and Google for Nessus. So let's go to Google and search for Nessus. And it's going to be one of the first links. It's by Tenable. It's the company that produces it. So you can take a look at their website. Now, as I had mentioned, there are a couple different versions. There's the community version, also known as Nessus Essentials. This is really great for anybody that's just interested in learning about cybersecurity, or just for your own personal use. I run this at my house just to keep an eye and tabs on my own network and my own servers and things that I'm doing here in my own home lab, and that works really well for that purpose. If you do want to use Nessus for an actual business purpose, you definitely want to check out some of these actually paid versions. So we have Nessus Professional and the Tenable IO version as well, which I'm actually not too familiar with. But Nessus is a fairly expensive product, so if you're going to buy it, you'll see that you're going to pay several $1,000s a year for a license. Yeah, like if you buy just 1 year at a time, you're looking at just like $3,000 for a retail license, so super pricey. So what do the advanced features get you? Pretty much just extra bells and whistles. You can scan larger networks and things like that. But again, for home users, this Essentials version is going to be just fine. So let's go ahead and download it. Now, it's going to ask you for some information. This is going to be important because it will send the license key to that email address. You do need an actual valid email address to sign up for your Nessus Essentials account. Now, if you don't want to give out your real email address, a site that I typically use is called TempMail. It's a really cool website for disposable email. So I'm going to do that, but I will say Nessus, they're not going to send you a ton of spam email, and you can unsubscribe from the marketing emails, and they're usually pretty good about that. But if you just want to play around with this, if you're not committed to giving out your real email address, feel free to use a disposable email, and I'm going to use TempMail. So tempmail.org, temp-mail.org. Okay. So wait for that to pop in, copy it to the clipboard. Okay. And we'll go ahead and there we go. So we have the download link. So we can go ahead and click on that. And for Kali Linux, we're going to want to download, let's see if I can find it. Right here, yeah. So Kali Linux is based off Debian, and it actually says Kali Linux now right in here, which is great. So I'm going to download this version, the Nessus 10.1.0, Debian 6, AMD64. And again, you can download the latest version, whatever the Kali Linux Debian version is, the latest one. Feel free to grab that. All right, so agree, and it's going to start downloading. Now, the important thing, that license key. So that license key is sitting right here in our TempMail inbox. So make sure you save this email. Keep this up on the screen for now. And let's click the Save File button. Yeah, because we're definitely going to need this to activate it. And don't use my key because I'm going to be activating it shortly, so it probably won't work. So just make sure you grab your own. Now, to actually install Nessus, we're going to be using the Kali Linux terminal. Now, this is how a lot of applications within Kali Linux are going to be installed. They're a combination of command line and GUI applications. So most things by default are going to be installed using the terminal. So the terminal is right up here, and you're going to launch it. And if you're not familiar with Linux, I have a couple of other videos posted with getting started with Kali Linux and just the Linux environment in general. Having a baseline understanding of Linux is going to be easier because you'll understand how to navigate around the CLI or command line interface here of this OS. But what I'm going to do is I am going to navigate into the downloads directory. And as you can see, or maybe not, I'll make this bigger so it's easier to see, we have our Nessus installer right here. And there's actually going to be a few steps to this process. So we're going to essentially set up the core Nessus environment, and then we're going to license it and install additional packages for that free or community version that we have the license key for. And to install this, it's different than in a Windows environment. So in Windows, you would just click on an executable and the installer would launch. Within here, we actually have to use a command line command to start the install. So to do that, we're going to use sudo and then dpkg, or the Debian Package Manager, -i for install. And then we're going to select this Nessus installation file. And if you're not familiar with, again, the way Linux works, this / essentially means find this nessus.deb file within our current working directory. So enter, type in the Kali Linux password, and it's going to install. And this installation process is fairly quick. And what this is essentially doing is it installed that core Kali service, and it has essentially had launched that service now on port 8834. So we're going to just copy this into our clipboard. And we can now navigate to the HTTPS Kali:8834. And if you have issues loading this, you can also replace Kali with localhost, and that might give you some better luck. Enter, and okay, it's saying unable to connect. And if you try this and it doesn't work, and you try localhost and it doesn't work, that's going to mean that the Kali service is supposedly installed, but it's actually not quite running yet. So we can go ahead and we can start this. And there's actually a couple of commands we're going to run. So we first want to run sudo systemctl enable nessus d, and this is going to enable that service. And it's going to tell you the service has now been enabled. And then we're going to start that service. Just like that. Hypothetically, there we go. So when you see this warning message, you can go ahead and you can accept the risk. This is just because we have a self-signed certificate. It doesn't really mean anything bad. What it's essentially saying is, hey, we noticed that you're trying to access this website that doesn't have a signed certificate. Do you want to continue? And this is just for home lab / testing purposes. So this is totally fine. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into advanced, and we're just going to say accept the risk and continue. Now, at this point, it's going to start to configure. It's going to start to configure the Nessus service, and you want to select the version of Nessus that you have a license key for. So, Nessus Essentials in our case, and we're going to click continue. You can either ask for a key at this point, but since we already did this, we can actually just go ahead and click skip because we already have our license key. So, click skip, and I can put our license key. I'm just going to copy this into my clipboard. And I can paste it in here, and we're going to click continue, and you're going to create an account. So what should I do for a password? Okay. So you're going to create a username and password, and now it says setup complete. And this next step is where the final configuration is actually going to occur. This will generally take anywhere from like 5 to 15 minutes. So you just got to hang tight and wait for this to finish. As this goes, I'm just going to pause the video and I'll resume again once this step is done. And all right, so I actually have not touched anything. The progress bar, it took about 15 minutes and hung out the progress bar and it finished, and it just dropped me straight into this window. So now within Nessus, you have a couple different options about how you want to actually handle the scanning. This tool is built out primarily to scan entire networks or specific targets on a network. So you have a lot of flexibility. You can enter in just individual IP addresses. You can use domain names, ranges, a lot of flexibility in here. Typically what I'll do though is I'll just close this out and I'll just go straight into this interface. And by default, you get dropped into this My Scans folder where you can create different scans. So I'm going to go ahead and just make a new scan. And from here, you have a lot of options. So there are some, I guess, predefined scans that are used to look for some of the more, I guess, popular or more common cybersecurity concerns. So there are scans specifically to look out for possible vulnerabilities that relate to WannaCry, Spectre and Meltdown, Pert Nightmare, and more. And these are constantly being updated. So these are really good quick scans to run. And the reason why this might be useful is, let's say you are managing a network and you just want to check and scan any device connected to your network to see if it is vulnerable to any of these particular things. Those scans are really quick ways that you can easily do that. The way I'll typically do it, though, is I'll just do a basic network scan. And instead of targeting a range of IP addresses, I'll generally will just do one. And there's a couple of reasons for this. Number one is, with this Essentials version, you are limited to the number of devices you can run scans against. I forget the number off the top of my head, but it is fairly restrictive. And two, I don't like to create a lot of chatter on a network. The more devices you are trying to scan, the more noise you are going to create. And if you're trying to be stealthy, like if you're trying to do like an ethical hacking exercise, scanning an entire network block, depending on the scan, you're probably going to get caught, or at least at the very least, you're gonna make a lot of noise. And also too, the more devices you're scanning, the more time these scans will take to complete. These scans can take a while to complete, like more than like a half hour. So if you're scanning 100 devices, it could take hours and hours for these things to finish. Now in here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do just kind of a basic scan just to see how the security of a web server that I have running on my network is looking. So to do this, I'm just going to make a name. So I'm going to call this LAMP server scan. You can put in a description if you want. I'll just keep it in the default folder, my scans. And I'm going to type in the IP address of the LAMP server. And this is on my local network. So I'll type that in here. 192.168.1.20, I believe, is the IP address. And then you can go through and we can walk through some of these other options, and I'll explain how they work. So with schedule, now what you could do is you could have the scan be scheduled to run on some reoccurring basis. And this could be really helpful as, let's say you have a couple of really kind of key servers you want to keep tabs on with the security. You could schedule the scan to run like every Saturday at like a low period of time, maybe like Saturday at like 2 a.m. And this scan would run and it would generate reports and other things. And this can be really useful for those purposes. So a good example too is, let's say someone, maybe you're monitoring a network. You could have a scan that monitors connected devices, and when someone plugs in a new device, then that scheduled scan would catch it, and you could set off an email or trigger some other alert. So the scheduled scans are really great, especially if you want to monitor a network more regularly. That being said, if you're just using this as like a one-off scan for either your own learning purposes, or if you're doing like a hack the box or penetration test, where it's just going to be a one-off thing, you can just leave it disabled. And then we have notifications. Again, this is like a really good spot. If you are going to actually set this up to run kind of on a persistent basis on a network, you could put an email address in here and then have it send off reports. So if certain vulnerabilities are found or if certain metrics are reached, you can have alerts and things like that that are sent off. Okay, so for discovery, we have some options in here. You can scan common ports, all ports, custom. I'm just going to leave this to the common ports. Generally speaking, the more ports you scan, the longer the scan is going to take to complete, and the more noise it's going to generate on the network. So I'm going to leave this to the common ports right now, and this will cover, I would say, most of the common services that you might be interested in seeing if they're running or not. Things like web servers, SSH, all those common things. Then we have a assessment. For this, I'm going to just leave it at the default settings. Or, actually we can change this. We'll scan for all web vulnerabilities quick. We'll do that. And each of these, again, have their own pros and cons. I usually will either leave it the default or just do the all known web vulnerabilities. I'm not an expert with these different scans, what each of these different scans do. You can play around with them, try them. I'm sure there's some documentation out there. And yeah, we'll just leave it like that. And then the reports. So again, this is like really helpful if you actually wanted to do like any type of like reporting, especially if you're going to set up a scan on a schedule. You might want to play around with this, but for now, I'll just leave it as it is. Again, for most of this stuff, leaving it as the default is going to be fine. Yeah, and we can just leave it as the default. So now on this credentials tab, now we have some options here. You can either choose to provide credentials or choose not to. And there's some reasons why you might want to or not want to do this. Now, if you wanted to do more of kind of like a penetration test where you wanted this to be from the outside looking in, you could just opt to not provide credentials. This is essentially what a threat actor on the other side, this is going to give them the same information that they would see. So if you want to see what information a threat actor can get, don't provide the credentials. If you provide credentials, what's going to happen is Nessus is actually going to log into that device. If it's running a common operating system like Windows or Linux, it's going to SSH in or connect via RDP or another common protocol. And when it does that, it's actually going to be able to look deep into the system and understand what software is running and how the configuration is actually deployed. So the benefit to providing credentials is it can give you a much better picture of how the actual security of a specific device is. If you don't give it the credentials, it can only see what it can find. But if you give it credentials, it can find a lot more. And I've done this in cases where maybe I have a server that's running an e-commerce website, and when I was doing this, I was often getting audited for PCI compliance. It's one of the regular processes. If you accept credit cards, you need to get audited. And for the company that was doing the audits, I'd have to give them credentials for their scanner so they could go in and look to see, well, what specific version of Apache are you running? How do you have it configured? And it would look much deeper into a system, and that's where the credentials can be useful for. For this scan, I'm not going to provide the credentials. I'm going to just do kind of an outside looking in scan, and I'm not going to allow it to actually log into my LAMP server. And there are some additional plugins as well. I honestly haven't played around too much with these, but they're in here if you wanted to take a look. I'm just going to leave this unconfigured as it is right now. So just to review, the big changes that we made was under assessment, we selected scan for all web vulnerabilities quick. And for discovery, we did port scan the common ports. All right, so I'm going to click save. And here is our scan. So right now, the scan has not ran yet. If I click into it, it's not going to really give me a whole lot of information, right? So to run it, it's pretty straightforward. You just have to click this play button, and it says launch if I hover over it. And the scan's going to run. Now, this scan is going to take some time to complete. I think typically these scans take maybe about a half hour, but it depends, again, on how thorough you had set the scanning to be. For those of you that have used Nmap, as you'll know, the more thorough you set your Nmap scans to be, kind of exponentially how much longer they're going to take. And it's similar with with Nessus as well. So I'm just going to let this run. I'll pause the video as well, and I'll come back into this in a few minutes once we start getting some results from our scan. Hey everyone, okay, so welcome back. It took about 40 minutes for my scan to run, so a little bit over the half-hour mark, which is kind of what I was expecting. And as you can see now, it says, it gets a little check mark here, which signifies that the scan is now complete. And if we click into it, you're gonna see some options and some data. Now, first off, you're gonna see vulnerabilities categorized from either information, which means essentially just there's no risk, just there just to inform you of things, to low, medium, high, and critical. So my LAMP server, thankfully, that I'm running at my house here is not very insecure according to Nessus, which is a very good thing to see. If you're scanning something and you see a lot of high or critical vulnerabilities, then you know something probably very wrong is going on. A good example, if you wanted just to quickly see what might cause that, if you set up like a Windows XP virtual machine and then use Kali Linux to scan against it, you are going to find a lot of critical vulnerabilities. So to actually look at these, if you click into vulnerabilities, it'll start to make a list. And this can be really useful for a lot of different things. So these information vulnerabilities, or notifications, I think is maybe a better term to phrase it. These are really great if you just want to get a general sense of like what's being ran on your network. Do you have web servers? Do you have devices with SSH enabled? Are you running certain versions of things? And that can be really helpful. So as an example, if I click in here, it's going to see a web application running on this LAMP server that has expired cookies. If I go back, I can find another information. What's a good one? SMTP. This one says, okay, found a mail server. SMTP is part of a mail server. So again, just information. So this would be really useful, again, for network administrators that want to just keep tabs on the network. But this could also be really useful for those of you that are into ethical hacking, because this can give you a lot of really good information about what services are running on a device, and can possibly also start to inform what type of vulnerabilities you might want to leverage to break into a device, especially if you're doing something like penetration testing. So it's really good for those sort of things. Now, if you go into like some of the low vulnerabilities, these are actually start to become the areas where if you see a lot of these, they could pose a risk to your environment or they might not. So here's one that says POP3 has clear text logins permitted. So this would only be an issue if I had people logging into my mail server using clear text credentials. If they're not using the mail server on this device, or if that's not an issue for whatever reason, then I can just ignore this one. And in this case, this server, we don't really use the email functionality at all. So I'll probably just ignore this. Or a good thing to do would be like just turn off email, since I'm not actually using it on the LAMP server. So you can look at these. And if you go and you find a server that has a lot of vulnerabilities, let me pull up an example. So hold on one second. And I'm going to pull up another Nessus box that I have running. And I've used these for some Hack the Box activities. And for those of you that aren't familiar with Hack the Box, it's a pretty awesome ethical hacking website where you can essentially learn to become a cybersecurity expert. There's different activities that give you the opportunity to try to break into various servers and boxes. So here is a scan that I did against this box known as Blue. And as you can see, this box has a lot more vulnerabilities. And if we click into this one, specifically like the high vulnerabilities, if I can filter it from the high, where did it go? And one thing I'd like to do is also just disable these groups on here. And here we go. So here's an example of one that says, okay, we found an unsupported Windows operating system, right? And this box was running Windows 7 Professional. So this is also really great for both network engineers and for security folks, because seeing that you have like Windows 7 machines running on a network can give you some good insight that, number one, this is a big security risk, and number two, you might want to like kick this device off of a network. So you can see like what operating systems devices are running, and it'll flag the ones that are vulnerable with these types of flags. And what you can do too is some of the times it'll tell you like what specific vulnerabilities can be leveraged against a device. So if you're doing like an ethical hacking activity, you can then find those exploits, and you can Google things like exploit, and you can start to find vulnerabilities that are either can be leveraged through things like Metasploit or just individual scripts, Python scripts or similar. So those are all in there as well. So I think that's about it, just to give you an overview of Nessus. And again, it's a pretty cool tool. I like it a lot. I keep it usually running along with Kali Linux, kind of side by side. And I honestly tend to enjoy it a little bit more than Nmap, just because it gives you some really nice interfaces with the graphs, and it retains the information in here, which is nice if you want to come back and look at it another time. Versus with Nmap, you have to like either save that log somewhere else or rerun the scan. But yeah, so that's it for now. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you ever have any comments or questions, feel free to reach out to me, and I will see you later.